With the hot potato system devised by our friends Dan Mole and Brett Frost, designers and developers interact constantly, from the beginning to the complete realization of the feature, removing barriers and exchanging feedback almost in real time. And once an effective collaboration is established, we can take a further step forward and introduce tools such as Relay. It not only benefits from a cooperative approach, but also enhances it, revolutionizing our working practices. In the next phase of our presentation, we will analyze a practical example of how to use Relay in a development context, to show you the power and effectiveness of this tool made by Google and currently in alpha version.
Hello everyone, I'm Nicolas, Staff Software Engineer at Telepass Digital.
And I'm Arianna, Android Software Engineer at Telepass Digital as well.
It's so exciting to attend the Droidcon Italy conference again this year. Thanks for joining us for this session. After this brief introduction, we will discuss how the worlds of design and development interact and how this collaboration might evolve to optimize our productivity. First, let's talk about the traditional end-of system. Usually, designers, after completing their part, hand over mockups and specification to developers. This separation between design and development, where each operates in its own independent silo, is anchored to the waterfall model and is showing several flaws. For example, designers might propose layouts that, while visually appealing, are technically difficult to implement or require disproportionate effort in development. In other cases, they may not take advantage of specific Android features simply because they are not aware of their existence. This can lead to delays, inefficiencies, and compromises. What about trying a different approach?
As a matter of fact, with the hot potato system devised by our friends Dan Mole and Brett Frost, designers and developers interact constantly, from the beginning to the complete realization of the feature, removing barriers and exchanging feedback almost in real time. This synergy could not only solve existing communication difficulties, but also optimize the process and create truly innovative solutions. And once an effective collaboration is established, we can take a further step forward and introduce tools such as Relay. It not only benefits from a cooperative approach, but also enhances it, revolutionizing our working practices. In the next phase of our presentation, we will analyze a practical example of how to use Relay in a development context, to show you the power and effectiveness of this tool made by Google and currently in alpha version.
It's an innovative plugin as it automatically converts layouts created in Figma to composable functions in Android Studio, ensuring a pixel-perfect match between design and implementation. However, for an effective conversion, the layout in Figma must follow well-defined specifications, allowing both the plugin to generate ready-to-use components that can be customized by the developer. Once generated, the developer can integrate and adapt these components in the layout. Relay also offers advanced features for manipulating the generated code if needed. The adoption of Relay facilitates a smoother, more accurate, and collaborative synergy between designers and developers, greatly reducing the risk of errors caused by misunderstandings.
Let's start by setting it up. It's an extremely simple and quick process, as follows. We install the plugin on Figma. We select the UI we want to convert to code. We generate the Figma personal access token. And moving on Android Studio, we install its plugin and insert the Figma token in its settings. We configure the Gradle files by adding the Relay package with its version to the plugins in the build.gradle file in the app module, or in the module where you want the code to be generated. And finally, let's make sure that the settings.gradle file has the import shown here. Without further ado, let's dive deeper into the topic at hand. What you see are the main features that Relay can offer in its current version that allows us to be as dynamic and flexible as possible. We will go through them one by one as we build a custom component present in our design library.
We choose this card because it gives us the opportunity to show you how to work with various parameters, as it includes text, images, buttons, progress bar, and custom elements, like the badge, for instance. Once the plugin is configured on Figma, we can proceed with the Share with Developers button, which saves a commit of the current version on Figma and allows us to directly copy its link, which we'll then paste into the Android Studio plugin. As we proceed with the flow, a summary of the components that have been added or modified is presented to us. Upon confirmation, Relay creates a folder called UI Packages, which contains folders for each individual component. Within them, we find images, fonts, and a JSON file with all the instructions to automatically generate the corresponding composable at build time.
Returning to the progress card we discussed earlier, we can break it down into sub-elements that are an icon, a title, and a radio button, and two standalone components: the badge, consisting of an icon and a text with background dependent on its status, and the residual credit, which is made up of some text that can be hidden, and the progress bar. Now let's take a closer look at the first elements, starting with the icon. Relay handles images differently, depending on their format. Vector ones are imported into Android Studio exactly as they appear on Figma, while with raster one there is more flexibility. These can accept parameters. For example, in case of PNG files, we use a parameter called image content, managed by Relay. In our specific case, the icon can vary based on where the card is used. And since we can't directly parameterize it, Relay offers us another solution, the children property, which must be set on Figma. This property is translated into Android Studio as a custom composable input, allowing us to replace the default image slot with our custom code. As for the title, it is handled as a simple text content in Relay so that it can be dynamic.
It's a different story for the RadioButton, since Relay fails to convert components that are native to the Android framework from those designed on Figma, such as text field or the RadioButton in question. Instead, it aims to visually recreate what is present in the design. This results in generating a stateless composable without any interaction. As such, it can only render itself based on external inputs, without preserving the selection, in the case of a radio, or the type of text, in the case of a text field. For this reason, the generated code for the radio button will not be a true radio, but rather only different images stacked based on its variant. In this specific case, we are fine with keeping the generated code, which is still faithful to the desired look.
Moving on with the analysis of the card, we come across the badge. It's a molecule already defined within our design system and can be used independently of the progress card in question. It's interesting to note how Relay embraced the concept of atomic design and allows us to incorporate a smaller component that are atoms and molecules like the badge into more articulated ones called organisms, such as the progress card we saw earlier, in a completely automatic way. If you are interested in learning more about this methodology, you can refer to the speech that Tati and Peppe presented at last year's Droidcon. The badge is defined on Figma with several variants expressed in a list. From this, Relay will extract the names and values to create a corresponding enum on Android Studio.
As we continue with the analysis of the card, we find another custom component, the residual credit, which, like the badge, is a self-standing component also used elsewhere. It is composed of a series of atoms, such as text, and another native component. Unlike the radio button mentioned earlier, whose overlaid image result was still satisfactory, for the progress bar, we need greater dynamism. Given that, as we have seen, different images will be generated to overlay, we will need to create a Figma variant for every progress value, 20, 40, 60, and this will be impractical. For this reason, Relay offers us the possibility to replace the static component taken from Figma in the generated code with a custom one created by us. To do this, we use a mapping file whose name must match that of the Figma component. Inside it, we will specify the custom composable as the target to replace it and its package. This file can be added manually by the developer or created using the shortcut provided by the Android Studio plugin. Once this is configured, Relay will consistently switch the static component with hours every time it's used, acting like a general rule.
It's important to note that the input parameters of the component previously created by Relay must be the same as the ones of the composable it replaces. So once we have created the custom composable, we must configure the same input parameters on the Figma plugin. In this way, Relay can pass the correct values from the outside. When the plugin converts the Figma layout into code, it uses the parameter names given by the designer. If there is a need to use a different nomenclature for some parameter, this can be done by specifying in the mapping file a list of objects whose source correspond to the parameter name on Figma, while the target is the new name you want to give to the input parameter of the composable. As you can see, after mapping, Relay will use the new component in every part of the code to replace the initial one. Relay can replace an entire Figma component, but it can't do so just for a portion of it. For this reason, it's essential that designers create an independent entity of the progress bar, and so for every other native elements that require interaction. The creation of these basic components in the design system usually does not happen, because the designers take their layout and behavior for granted. But for Relay, it's crucial.
Going back to residual credit, let's now see how to make our component more dynamic by configuring parameters that can be used directly on Figma. We'll begin by analyzing the following parameters. Design, these represent the two variants of our residual credit component, which are enabled and disabled. In the code, these values translate into an enum that can be passed as input to the composable. Label and amount, both text in the upper part have text content parameter associated with them in the typography section of Figma. The difference between them is that the first has only one style, and Relay will treat it as a string, while the second, having multiple styles, will be treated as an annotated string. Progress is progress bar enabled and is progress error. Essentially, we need them to correctly draw the coloring and progression of our custom progress bar. SwapperText is a Boolean parameter created in the layer section of Figma. It allows us to show or hide the associated element, which in our case is the text located below the progress bar.
As for the badge, we want to make the following parameters dynamic. The design to customize the badge based on its different variants, and the label to personalize the text inside the badge. In the top part of the progress card, let's focus on the following element. As for the top left icon, we've linked the children parameter to the icon element on Figma. This allows the generated component to accept a custom composable function as input. And the title, this is another textual element, so we associated it with the text content parameter. Whereas the radio button doesn't require any specific parameter, as it will be changed automatically according to the specified variant.
Finally, regarding the entire progress card, it inherits all the attributes from its subcomponents, including those of the badge, residual credit, and progress bar, in addition to its specific attributes. In the generated code, this translates into a list of parameters on the parent composable, allowing both the card itself and its internal components to be customized. In detail, the specific parameters of the progress card include on tap to pass a callback and handle the selection or deselection of the card, and design to select one of the variants of the main component. This can be default, default selected, disable, and disable selected. We have extensively discussed the variants, but how are they actually used within our application?
After creating and configuring the components on Figma, importing the link into Android Studio, and completing the build phase, we obtain stateless components that are fully customizable based on input parameters. All the enums and various properties can be associated to variables in remember function or data inside a state. In both cases, we have the possibility to create a custom composable wrapper that accepts simplified input parameters and includes all the variables and logic needed to customize the auto-generated component. This allows us to easily integrate and take full advantage of component variants. In this specific example, we use the input parameters to determine the threshold for displaying an error. And this, together with the remember function that tracks the user selection, allows us to decide which variant of the card to display. Okay, now we've said almost everything. The last feature we're going to see is the customization of the theme.
Let's start by saying that Relay generates fixed colors for its components by default. This may be inadequate in our case since our app handles a different flavor based on the type of user, which may be consumer or business, and therefore we need distinct themes and colors. In our design library, we mapped a list of colors, like content primary and secondary, and custom typography, such as body medium and title large, that we use in our components. In the code, we have already created the corresponding theme with variables that match those of Figma. Now, we want Relay to use it in the generated files. To do this, we can create a JSON file that instructs the plugin on how to replace themes found on Figma with those in the app, like we did for the component mapping. In this JSON, we use tokens to link the names of Figma to those of the theme created in the app. They can be standard material ones or more descriptive, like content primary. But we can also customize them, for example, by using the string pep. It's also important to specify the necessary imports for the generated files so that they can correctly use our classes. This applies to both colors, as you can see from the example, and typography.
This file must be created under the style mapping folder in the UI package resources. The style mapping file must be specified when we import the link into Android Studio, unlike the component mapping, which is interpreted at build time. In our case, the theme is completely custom, so we have to specify the mapping. On the other hand, if the theme on Figma were to follow the guidelines of Material 3 or 2, it could be directly imported by the plugin as a composed theme, without the need to specify the JSON file. As you can see from the slide, by default, without specifying any theme, the plugin uses a hard-coded value, recreating a color through its ARGB every time. Applying the mapping, however, Relay will use the content primary attribute of our theme. Okay, now with this, we've covered all the key features.
Now we would like to talk to you about what we believe is the greatest advantage offered by Relay. Sometimes, designers decide to surprise us with new components or variants, like what happened with the badge. And yes, this is a true story. But don't panic, all we have to do is press Update UI Package and voila, everything is ready to be inserted into the code. All that's left to say is, my job here is done.
To wrap it up, we can summarize our presentation saying that by putting into practice the techniques we've seen before, enhancing synergy with the designers, and making the most of collaborative solutions like Relay, we can significantly minimize the effort required to manage a design system, regardless of its complexity. This will leave you free to focus on more stimulating topics. However, it also has some issues. First of all, the decision to adopt a plugin like Relay must be made by the whole team. If in the future a design team chooses a different tool to design new components or to manage the design system, this would lead to significant refactoring. Developers could find themselves in the situation of having to rewrite the entire auto-generated code of Relay or adapt to the new plugin. In addition, Let's assume that we regularly use the plugin, and after adding or modifying a component in Figma, we expect to update it also on RStudio. However, due to an issue beyond our control, the plugin unexpectedly stops working. This would block development until it's restarted, or force us to manually rewrite the component to continue. And another point to emphasize is the fact that it's still in alpha version, so it presents bugs and technical limitations that may be fixed with future updates.
Moreover, designers will need to pay more attention to details, such as ensuring that frames are structured identically in variants and that components' names are unique. Otherwise, the generated code will not be able to distinguish which class to use. One must also consider that automatically generated components may not match the performance of manually designed ones. Furthermore, if the layout is a native element, there is a little overhead to deal with. That is, designers must also create a standalone component that matches the native one, as we saw for the progress bar in the example, and the developers have to add the corresponding mapping file. Finally, the fact that Relay is not open source may influence some teams' decision about its adoption. Overall, although it offers innovative solutions, it is critical to weigh the pros and cons before fully adopting it into your workflow.
Last but not least, Relay does not support iOS yet. Oh no! Anyway, that's one less side problem to solve. So this is it. Thanks for your attention. We hope to have piqued your curiosity. A big shout out to our amazing team for making this presentation possible. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask.
Thank you so very much, Team Telepass. Thank you. Well done.